Hey there, cloud native enthusiasts, and welcome to another episode of the IDP playlist. Today I'm going to talk about Argo CD, which is the most popular tool within the CNCF community for GitOps. Of course, we're going to briefly talk about GitOps, the benefits, the Argo project, and then we're going to wrap it up with a hands-on demo. Let's dive right in. So let's start off by looking at the CNCF landscape page. The project we're going to talk about, Argo, is in here in the category of continuous integration and delivery, and it's a graduated project. So if I click on the icon, you see that this started 6 years ago. The project is pretty established and pretty popular. You can find the GitHub repository in here and the number of headcounts, their fundings, and some other useful information. So what is GitOps and why it is important? So if you think of this famous SDLC infinite loop, we have on the left side people, the developers, people writing code, contributing to their code base, making some changes and so on. They make some changes, they push their code to the repository, then there is a process trigger, and this process builds some artifacts, stores it somewhere, and then comes the people on the right side that take that artifact and deploy it to wherever it's supposed to be deployed, usually like a Kubernetes cluster. In this approach, the developer builds the artifact and the operation guy will take that artifact and just deploy it. There is no tight feedback loop built into this mechanism. And the Kubernetes cluster is pretty reactive, so it basically waits for some process to tell it what to do. However, in the pull approach, the Kubernetes cluster plays a more proactive role. So we have a GitOps operator running inside our cluster, which is in our case our Argo CD. The infrastructure configuration, the application configuration, and pretty much anything that Kubernetes can understand and Kubernetes manifests are stored in a Git repository. And the GitOps operator needs at least read access to this Git repository to be able to synchronize the cluster to the desired state mentioned in this Git repository. Anybody can have access to this Git repository, but you can definitely protect this Git repository by implementing some role-based access mechanism. And this reduces the overhead on the CI systems. However, CI systems, as you can see in this figure, are still used for building the artifacts that are needed for the deployment. If you're interested to know more about the benefits of GitOps, please go ahead and check out this article. I'll put the link in the description. I'm going to continue by moving on to the hands-on exercise. All right, let's continue with the Argo CD hands-on exercise. I put the link of the exercise in the description. If you click on it, you just need to log into the ClearCoda environment. So in this training, we will first install Argo CD into our environment, log into the Argo CD UI next to see how it looks like. Then we're going to create the first Argo CD application, which is of course being managed by Argo CD in a GitOps approach. And then we're going to demo some really useful features called auto healing and auto pruning. So let's dive right in. Before I start, I need to talk about this ClearCoda environment a little bit. So it's a really good environment for testing purposes, and there's already Kubernetes cluster built in. So you don't have to provision test clusters like Minikube or Kind or anything like that. If I simply do k cluster info, I see the Kubernetes cluster endpoint and so on. So let's start with the installation. If you look at the Argo CD documentation for installing Argo CD, it is going to ask you to first create a namespace and then apply a install YAML file. This install YAML file pretty much has everything you need for having our Argo CD up and running. I pretty much mounted this file into this environment with some tiny adjustment that I'm going to talk about. So let's go ahead and first create the namespace and then simply click here to execute this install.yaml. As you see, it is going to go ahead and create a bunch of resources for us. And the adjustment I have made here is in the Argo CD service. I have basically changed the Argo CD service type from cluster IP to node port. So if I do get svc in the Argo CD namespace, you're going to see that the Argo CD server is of type node port. And that is because I want to later access this service by mapping this port from this environment to the outside world by simply clicking on a link. So let's move on. So next thing, we need to log into Argo CD web user interface. So by default, when you install Argo CD installs the initial admin password in a secret in our Argo CD namespace. So if I look at the secrets in the Argo CD namespace, I'm going to see like there's the initial admin secret in here. So you can decode this secret, base64 secret, and see the value of the secret. Here it is. And if you want to access the Argo CD UI, we can simply click on the URL link, and you see this is the Argo CD UI. So I can go ahead and simply type in admin as the username, and the password is the thing that Argo CD gave us. And we are in. This is the Argo CD environment. So let's move on to the next step. We logged into the Argo CD UI. Now we want to create the first Argo CD application. Again, the application is a custom resource that Argo CD has defined. So if I do git CRDs, the custom resource definitions, you're going to see that applications is a new resource type that Argo CD has added to the Kubernetes API. So I've already provided an empty template for the application. In this directory, we can simply do vim home application and edit this one. So the name of the application is guestbook. The namespace of the application is also guestbook. And the next thing Kubernetes expects us to provide is the Kubernetes endpoint. So basically, Argo CD wants to know on which Kubernetes cluster this application needs to be deployed. If it's going to be the same as the one running Argo CD, we can simply use this address, which is in our case true. So let's just go ahead and paste this here. And the other fields that we need to provide is the repository URL. So the Git repository that holds the configuration. We're going to take a look at the repository in a bit, but let's just provide the address first. So I'm going to copy this one and paste it in here. And the path is the directory inside this repository that holds the configuration, which in our case is called guestbook. And at last but not least, the target revision or the source branch is what Argo CD needs to perform its operation. So we're going to say here master. So I guess we're done with this file. Let's go ahead and open up this repository in our browser. This is the repository, how the repository looks like, and in the guestbook directory we have two very simple manifests, one for the deployment of the application and the image, and one with the service definition. So let's just go ahead and apply this. So now the Argo CD application is now there. Let's look at the Argo CD UI. You see the application is now showing up. As you can see, the status of the application is out of sync. And if we want to change it, we can simply click on the sync button and do perform synchronization. And as we do it, you see now it is progressing. It is basically fetching the stuff from our repository in here and deploying them to the cluster. So if I click on it, you see it recognized that there is a service type called guestbook UI, and there's a deployment type called guestbook UI, and it basically deployed everything. And now let's look at the cluster. So if I look at everything in the guestbook namespace, I have my application up and running, deployed in a GitOps approach. Now we're going to talk about some really cool features of Argo CD, which are self-healing and self-pruning. So let's talk about self-healing first. So what does it mean? It simply means if something happens to our application, Argo CD can help us heal our application or recover or make it more resilient. So let's say if our deployment crashes or somebody deletes it with some false operation, Argo CD needs to recover the state of our application to the desired state. Before we do that, let's have a look at our guestbook application in the Argo CD UI. I want to go ahead and make some changes to the application, and I'm gonna go ahead and enable automatic syncing, and also enable self-healing and self-pruning. By default, these options are off and are disabled. You can manually enable them or edit your application manifest as you want. But I suppose this is due to some safety mechanism. So Argo CD doesn't want operator to do a lot before people actually explicitly tell that they want those features. So I rearranged my windows a bit so that we can see what's going on. On the right side, I have the Argo CD UI open. Everything looks green, A-OK, very nice. So now what happens if someone tries to delete, let's say, our guestbook UI deployment? So if I simply do this, you see very quickly Argo CD reacted. It detected a drift. It realized that there is a drift from the desired state. And it basically reverted back to the desired state. That is really nice. So that's basically its auto healing. So now let's talk about the auto pruning feature. What does it mean? It simply means that we have made some changes to the Git repository and we have changed the desired state. And now Argo CD needs to prune the unnecessary stuff or basically clean up the mess. So for example, here in the Argo CD, we have the guestbook application, which consists of a guestbook UI service and deployment. Let's say we want to change the name of the service to something else. I'm going to simply do the update on the GitHub UI and commit the changes here. And by default, Argo CD has a 3-minute interval to update stuff. I'm going to manually synchronize stuff. You see it immediately realized the drift and changed the service to my guestbook UI service. And it got rid of the guestbook UI and it deleted it. So that pruned the stuff, cleaned things up. That's it for this demo. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please give it a like and subscribe to the IDP playlist so that you won't miss other episodes of the Internal Developer Platform series. Thank you.